Latin America, Pacific, and the MENA region. The MENA region is the Middle East and North Africa. This webinar, focusing on transformative financing and accountability for gender equality work, seeks to draw the interlinkages between women's rights, sustainable development, and development cooperation. This webinar is happening on the fringes of the Financing for Development Forum. For those of you following the FFD Forum, it's currently ongoing in New York. And in Africa too, we are having the African Regional Forum on Sustainable Development happening now in Addis Ababa. I'm sure the other regions have already had their regional forums on the sustainable development. It's part of preparations towards the high-level political forum in New York on SDGs in July this year. Within the feminist movement space, 2025 is historic for us because in next year, we're going to reflect on Beijing Plus 30. But during this 30-year period, a lot have happened. We've had the MDGs. There have been several continental declarations, including in Africa, Africa's Women's Decade, the Maputo Protocol. We've also had interventions around aid effectiveness, which later was replaced by development effectiveness. The current FFD process that is going on happened within this 30-year period. We have the SDGs and also the Generation Equality Action Coalitions, which many of us present in this webinar are actively engaged in that space. How have this worked together to promote? So all these processes, if we want to just look at a space of 30 years, all these processes that I've mentioned, how have it worked together to promote women's rights and gender equality? This is something that we'll try to interrogate in this meeting. According to UN Women, data available on SDG 5 is uneven. So is global progress. And where data are missing, we are all aware that women and girls are invisible. Resources required for acceleration of SDG 5 implementation are not available. ODA, which is one of the major sources, seems to be depleting, as evidenced by the preliminary 2022 figures that were shared in the findings. It revealed significant redirection of ODA across DAC members towards humanitarian response, reconstruction, and refugee cause. SDG 5 is not a major focus of the voluntary national reports which countries are currently engaged in. And in cases where countries even report on SDG 5, they fail to report on SDG 5C1, which focuses on putting transparent mechanisms in place to track public resources for women's empowerment and gender equality. In March, the CSW68 priority team was accelerating the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls by addressing poverty and strengthening institutions and financing with a gender perspective. Accelerated progress requires investment. However, data from 48 developing economies shows that an additional $360 billion is needed per year. Every year, we need $360 billion to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment across key global goals, including ending poverty and hunger. And we know that the Agenda 2023, and we have 5 years or 6 years more to get to 2030. Agenda 2030, we have about 6 years to get to 2030. And if we require $360 billion to be able to meet the global goals, then we are not sure, because there was a finding that also showed that all the goals, the target, we are not doing well when it comes to the SDG goals. And to only need $360 to need 360 billion to be able to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment before 2020 is a huge challenge. Investing in women and girls was a clarion call at this year's CSW. Efforts at promoting gender equality saddled with poverty, conflicts, instability, inequalities, gender-based violence, among others. Financing for women's rights work keep dwindling. The donor community is pushing concepts such as co-creation, localization as a way of working together to promote country ownership, focus on results, inclusive partnership, transparency, and accountability. In our discourses, one of the things that we should look at is how have these concepts worked out to ensure quality, transparent, and inclusive interventions to push the gender equality and women's empowerment agenda. This may name more issues within our different spaces on our continents and countries. We would attempt to interrogate them as part of efforts to push the feminist agenda by questioning the status quo and demanding for a gender transformative sustainable development agenda in this webinar during our discussions and this afternoon. I welcome you all once again, and I wish all of us a fruitful deliberation. Thank you. Now, with our agenda, I'll call on Shanta to set the tone for us. The webinar is looking at transformative financing and accountability for gender equality work. When we talk about transformative financing and accountability, what are we saying? Tanya, you have 5 minutes to make a brief, set the tone for us before we move to the regional dialogues. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia. Greetings to all our participants from all over the world. We really welcome in this very, very important webinar on transformative financing and accountability for gender equality. As Patricia has already highlighted, the state of financing for gender equality from all sources and its state already. So I really thanks Patricia for really giving a very good picture of this state. As we CPD feminist group, we as a feminist group advocate for gender equality and empowerment of women, empowerment of all women in all our diversities. For financing, because we feel financing as a tool for effective development and effective development cooperation. We advocate financing for gender equality and more so for gender transformative financing and accountability to it, focusing on 5C1 indicator, which is an indicator of GPEDC global monitoring of SDGs. As we all know, we the feminists have been voicing since decade for the gender equality and gender just development. We voices against the gender blank approach to development, and we advocated for gender sensitive, from gender sensitive to gender responsive. And now in this 21st century, the gender transformative approach in development for achieving gender equality, empowerment of all women and girls, and the sustainable development in this planet. In fact, the main agenda of the sustainable development goals is transforming our world. I would like to reiterate it, transforming our world is our agenda, is the agenda of the globe. In order to transform our world as envisaged by the Agenda 2030, we need transformative financing. We need accountability to it so that as we envision financing as a tool for real transformative social change, which means transformation of social norms, values, system, structures, and that constrains women and diverse genders in developing their innate potential and agency. We call not only for increased financing for gender equality, but for shifting a shift in financing and financial architecture and the accountability to eliminate harmful gender norms, roles, relationship, and to create a role models, leadership, innovative gender responsive development program, feminist movement, effective development, and CSO's effective development, and women's CSO's effective development. And we really call for a shift in approach from conventional, gender sensitive approach, which focus mainly on equal distribution of resources, to a gender transformative approach, which takes into account structural, practical, and normative barriers, because deeply rooted systemic discrimination, inequalities, injustices need to address at all levels by dedicating funding from all sources at all levels and making financing for gender equality mandatory through act, policy, strategy, and accountability mechanism. We can learn from Iceland, Rwanda, and in some other countries listed in the Global Gender Gap of the World Economic Forum. I will share the link of Rwanda as an example of gender transformative financing system after a while. I will post in the chat. And gender responsive budget, which has been into the system of many countries, is still not a mandatory. And officials feels that this is an added burden. Thus, they are not reporting. They are not reporting in the VNR. In the VNR reports, only few countries report on 5C1, which is to make and track the public financing for gender equality. So the financial management and financial information system need to be integrated into the public financial system. And we also call for equal access to all financial resources at all levels to bring de facto gender equality in the world at large. Because the population, more than half of the population are women. So we really urge for equal access to all financial resources. We also call for dedicated and sufficient funding for women's rights organizations to effectively, efficiently, and equitably address diverse gender issues and create enabling environment at all levels to build gender equal world. And mainstreaming is essential but not sufficient for addressing the present state of inequalities. We have been, as we all know, from the ODAs, Patricia has already highlighted about it. Less than 1% of ODA is finance, or finance goes to the women's rights organization. Then how can we really expect achieving gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls by 2030? Thus, since this financing for financing for development forum is going to take place in this year, we really need to urge, appeal for gender transformative financing. It's not only the scarce resources, which is scarce resources, need to be finance for really eliminating, ending discrimination and discriminations against all women and girls and all genders, so that the finance, which is a tool, will be a real tool for transformation as envisaged by the Agenda 2030. And this is the state, this is the position CPD feminist group is taking on, and we'd like to share more about it. I will share in the chart the links. The position paper developed in for the GPD high level meeting in Geneva, and also the high level political forum. We had side event on that. I will share those links for additional information and knowledge. And we also welcome all to really advocate for transformative gender financing. Thank you all. See you.
Thank you, Shanta, for setting the tone for us. So I just want to remind our speakers that when you are speaking, I'll put my video off. Immediately you see that I've put my video on, then it means I want you to wrap up because your time it's due. So please, when you see my video on, then it means that I'm trying to tell you to wrap up. Thank you so much for setting the tone for us, talking about our work as CPD Feminist Group, focusing on effective development cooperation, the kind of work we've done around the group, especially during high-level political forum, our position papers. We look forward for you sharing the links that you did promise to share in the chat box. I would like to say that please introduce, for those of you joining us, kindly introduce yourself in the chat box, your name, your organization, and the country that you are coming from. And also, we've posted a link for registration. We know you registered before you got a link to join this webinar, but then we also need to pull up the participants registration. So there is a link. Kindly complete the link so that we get your full details to enable us reach out to you in further engagements. Thank you so much. I'll now move on to the regional webinars. For about a month now, the CPD Feminist Group have had back-to-back meetings across the group. So we've had meetings in Latin America and Caribbean. We've had meetings in Europe and Central Asia. We've had meetings in Africa. We are yet to have our meeting in the Middle East and North Africa, the MENA region. But today we are here. I know that it's not all of us that were able to join these meetings. And even if we joined the one that happened on our continent. But we are here, we would want to hear from all the continents what transpired during the meetings and how we can move forward together to push for gender equality and women's rights. If we are talking about transforming financing and accountability for gender equality work, it needs collective efforts. It needs that we maximize our energies to ensure that we achieve the needed outcomes that we are all aiming to achieve. So we would hear from all our regional coordinators what happened in their forums and the key issues that came up, and together we'll have discussions around that and see how we'll move forward some of the key issues that will come out. I would also like to add that whatever comes out of this would inform engagement in other policy spaces. So we have the CSO forum that will take place in Nairobi in May. We also have the high-level political forum that would happen on our different continents. There are different engagements that are ongoing. So all the discussions that we'll have here would help inform the positions that we come up with to engage these spaces. Thank you all. I'll call on Tanya Sanchez, the regional coordinator for CPD feminist groups. She's also the executive director for Shanta, you have to help me to mention the name Kondu. I think coordination of women groups. When Tanya takes the floor, she will mention her organization. Thank you, Tanya. You have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Patricia. Un gusto compartir con todas ustedes. Voy a intentar ir lento para ayudar a las intérpretes y ser bastante concreta. En las reuniones que hemos tenido entre el movimiento feminista de América Latina en torno a lo que hace a la eficacia del desarrollo, hemos mantenido o hemos sido muy críticas. Ya desde el plantear y el trabajar sobre la agenda de el desarrollo y el financiamiento y el articular esta agenda con los objetivos de desarrollo sostenible, no fue posible, creemos, y eso hay que enfatizarlo, sin el aporte que hacemos las organizaciones sociales y sin el aporte de las organizaciones feministas. Definitivamente, los objetivos que se plantean en el marco de la eficacia de la ayuda y de la agenda de desarrollo por promover, fortalecer el ejercicio de derechos, ha sido, y creemos, ha sido fruto de la lucha de las distintas organizaciones sociales y la incidencia que tenemos con nuestros gobiernos. Y la articulación, por eso es que celebro este espacio. Sin embargo, desde nuestro análisis nos hemos planteado que cada vez hay una reducción muchísimo más fuerte a el financiamiento para el trabajo de la sociedad civil y, como lo decía Shanta, muchísimo más para el trabajo de las organizaciones feministas que tienen por objetivos el contribuir a cerrar las brechas de desigualdad de género en distintos espacios. Si bien la agenda de desarrollo se ha concentrado y se ha articulado con la agenda de los objetivos de desarrollo sostenibles, creemos que hay que analizar esta agenda desde una perspectiva financiera, porque además se ha estado viendo que se está utilizando el financiamiento o las obligaciones que tienen los estados por financiar, por apoyar al desarrollo, como un pretexto más bien para impulsar al sector privado en la consecución de los ODS, en lugar de fortalecer el papel de los estados y de la sociedad civil. También nos preocupa el endeudamiento de las mujeres, porque en la mayoría de nuestros países y muchísimo más a partir de la crisis económica en la que está el mundo y posterior a lo que ha sido la crisis de salud como la del COVID, hemos visto que a quienes más en quienes más tiene un impacto es justamente en las mujeres. Y esto con mucha preocupación vemos que todavía no se está mirando, no se ve la necesidad de fortalecer el financiamiento para servicios de cuidado. Ahí creemos que en la agenda el tema de la economía del cuidado está siendo muy importante, pero creemos también que hay que profundizar esta mirada más allá de los servicios, sino profundizar desde lo que hace a la construcción y a la recuperación de los procesos culturales en cada uno de nuestros países. También un punto en el que hemos estado reflexionando es que es necesario el fortalecer y el promover la transparencia, el exigir la transparencia a las agencias de cooperación respecto al destino de los fondos y cómo se están implementando los proyectos, especialmente en relación con la participación de las comunidades locales en nuestros países y la garantía de la autosuficiencia y la soberanía que se promueve una vez que las agencias se van, ¿no? Algo que ha sido para nosotras muy importante también ha sido debatir ¿de qué estamos hablando cuando hablamos del financiamiento al desarrollo? ¿De qué tipo de desarrollos? ¿No? Y creemos que desde el sur global, tanto en América Latina, y esperamos y conocemos también la posición de nuestros compañeros en África, en la India, es que hay unos paradigmas de desarrollo que están más bien promoviendo miradas capitalistas, patriarcales y coloniales. Cuando parte de lo que se ha discutido y creemos que hace al nudo y al centro de hablar de financiamiento para el desarrollo, es también el cuestionar, y eso lo hemos ido diciendo, es de qué tipo de desarrollo estamos hablando cuando no se reconoce el aporte de más de la mitad de la población en la construcción de nuestras economías. De ahí que creemos que estos espacios son importantes para discutir, primero sí el financiamiento, pero también el tema de la deuda, cómo se está planteando la deuda en nuestros países, a quiénes y quiénes son los más vulnerables, ¿no? En este marco creemos que está pendiente el que sigamos articulándonos como sociedad civil para dar propuestas concretas y a partir de nuestras realidades, dejando de lado también ya si bien son importantes los diagnósticos, empezar a desarrollar propuestas, a plantear salidas que estén relacionadas y que respondan a nuestros contextos, muchísimo más cuando se nos plantea, por ejemplo, la evaluación de esta agenda de desarrollo a la cual todos los países se han sumado. Este año se va a estar evaluando aquello y que no se pierda la discusión o la incorporación de la dimensión política en los debates actuales, especialmente en el contexto de la falta de transparencia por parte de los estados, de las corporaciones y de la misma cooperación internacional, ¿no? Ahí creemos que uno de los instrumentos, como ya lo decía al principio Shanta, es el indicador 5C1. Sin embargo, es necesario el que podamos desde sociedad civil poder manejar muchísimo más, conocer estos instrumentos y nuevamente articularnos y fortalecer alianzas en nuestras regiones. Es lo que en Latinoamérica hemos planteado. Existen varias redes, pero hay que intentar fortalecer y articularnos muchísimo más y mucho más con otras regiones de sociedad civil, teniendo cuidado de que el sentido político de lo que hace la lucha por la igualdad y la equidad no se pierda. Muchas gracias.
Thank you. Thank you, Tanya. You were within your time, and I hope those of us yet to speak would also remain within your time. When you were sharing the outcomes of your discussions in LACAM, it was like you were in the African, when the African webinar was being held, because all the issues that you did mention, the issue around shrinking civic space and the fact that even more women rights, it affects more women rights organizations, it affects women-led organization and all that, and the need to strengthen our engagement, the need to strengthen solidarity were all issues that also came up in the African webinar. But because I've been speaking, I think I'll move on to Valentina to share the Central Africa, Central Asia, Europe webinar before we share the African one. So Valentina, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you, Patricia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. We have participants from different regions of our small world. And I think it's very important, our topic today. We discuss about money. We discuss about gender equality. We discuss about women. And despite of the fact that women's rights and gender equality are recognized as the foundation of sustainable development, gender equality remains the most pressing human rights challenge. It is reality. Oh, told me if you see my presentation, because I see some problems.
Valentina,
it's
we can
okay?
see your presentation, so go on.
Thank
Put
you.
it in a presentation mode. Okay, yeah.
Now
So
it's
we
okay.
can see it. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you. What are the challenges? During our discussions, during our regional webinar, we identified the most important. Insufficient funding to ensure effective implementation of political commitments made by the government. Governments have failed to back up their commitment with adequate funding, because we know all governments promised a lot, promised to push to promote gender equality. But how many countries, how many governments respected the commitment and ensured adequate fundings and accountability mechanisms to ensure the advancement of women's rights and gender equality? It's a huge question. Also, we identified the lack of accountability for SDG 5 C1, gap in communication on monitoring this indicator. But also the last issues are pressure on civil society organizations in some countries as foreign agents. And accordingly, access to external resources was decreased. Our colleagues in Kyrgyzstan, in Georgia, and other countries, they asked support to our international partners on continuously support by different programs. But now it's very challenging. Also, of course, in our region, it's the problem of multiple crises. And now it's a question how to survive and how our organization can survive in this context. Why we should discuss about this? I will not focus more attention on SDG 5 C1, because we discussed during different meetings, and Patricia and Chantal, my colleagues, mentioned, and we have a Nurgul, she's expert in the field. But for us today, it's very important to remember that equality requires investment in women's organization and beyond. And Antonio Guterres mentioned that to address women's poverty, we must put money into education and training and social protection, care policy, ending violence against women, and much more. Practically, the governance should invest in all sectors. Our regional webinar for Europe and Central Asia took place on 29 March and was organized by Forum of Women's NGO of Kyrgyzstan, also Platform for Gender Equality and Gender Center from Moldova. I am so happy that 45 participants from Armenia, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Ukraine, and Moldova participate in this very important event. You see some photo, I like it so much. But the most important is that should mention as best practices implementation of capacity building on gender budgeting programs addressed to civil society organization and public authority. We can mention Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Georgia, Ukraine. And specifically, we have my colleague from Keystone, Moldova. They implemented very interesting regional program on gender budgeting. Also, as best practices was mentioned inclusion of gender budgeting elements into local public budget. Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Georgia, thanks to civil society organizations advocacy, but also civil society organization advocacy activity on governance, transparency, and accountability, and the issues of public funds. Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Moldova, Azerbaijan, Georgia. But also I'd like to thank special Evgenia Kozyreva. She is a participant today also. Kazakhstan information about that Kazakhstan is a donor for countries in the region. But in this context, we need more information on how to manage this mechanism and ensure transparency and accountability about all this funding opportunity. Specifically, I would like to mention Abaskan from Kyrgyzstan. She told very clear that women's involvement in decision-making and combating domestic violence are crucial for the progress of our society. We need to overcome funding obstacles to achieve this goal. Kaisha from Kazakhstan mentioned effective partnership and ongoing training for organization are crucial for improving the situation of women and combating gender inequality. We need to strengthen our effort in this regard. Nina Lozinski from Moldova, our collaboration with local administration has yielded significant results in promoting gender equality. Our experience shows that investing in women's training and funding can truly change the social landscape. Evgenia Kozyreva from Kazakhstan. Transparency and funding for NGO is essential for ensuring accountability and efficiency in gender equality. Antonina from Moldova, rising awareness and sensitivity in all projects and activity are crucial for the progress of gender equality. We can mention many issues, but as key requirement, we should mention addressing underinvestment, investing in policy and programs that address gender inequality and boosting women's agency and leadership, increasing accountability, closing the communication gap and follow-up monitoring measures, implementing gender budgeting, and reaffirming the need to integrate gender budgeting into country public financial management and ensure that the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment, transparency, and accountability are used in the public funds. Also, we recommended some actions very clear on solving the problem of underinvestment, increase accountability, building the communication gap and subsequent monitoring measures. And it's very important, our solidarity, our common actions, our common voice, and ask our governance to allocate funds, reform fiscal process, improve staff skills, report annually to the public, adjust the global indicator at the national level. But our responsibility as civil society to ensure strong monitoring and evaluation process. And this, of course, it's very important to thinking together. Our next step. What are our next steps? And I think at all regional level, it's the same questions. Through our solidarity, through common intervention, common project, common vision, we can do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Valentina, for taking us through the discussions that you had during the Central Asia Europe webinar and all the critical issues that you looked at. I wouldn't want to go over rates because we'd also have open discussions. But one of the things that you said that is key for me is gender budgeting. We started talking about gender budgeting long ago, but we are also aware that most of our countries do not engage in or consciously engage in gender budgeting. So I think one of the things that, but gender budgeting, we are talking about gender equality and women's empowerment. We are talking about investing in women and girls. We are talking about quality financing gender equality work. But if we don't consciously engage in gender budgeting, then some of these things that we are talking about, we keep repeating it without achieving results. So I think it's about time we also call on our governments to ensure that gender responsive budgeting is a key guideline in budget when it's time to develop national budgets. Gender responsive budgeting should be one of their key guidelines that they give out to ministries. And then also our governments, the finance ministries in our various countries, there is the need for them to have a gender eye so that when different ministries, different sectors present their budgets, they look at it from a gender perspective, ensuring that the budgets that they present, the plans that they present are gender sensitive. Because when we talk about gender, it's not just the gender ministry that should be responsible. We need all sectors to ensure that their interventions are gender responsive. I'll quickly move on to the African. So thank you once again, Valentina, for the presentation. And I also want to like to state that we had a very successful regional webinars because in Latin American also, I know they had over 50 women rights organizations participating, and also in the African webinar, we had about 55 women rights organizations participating. I'll share my presentation on Africa. What I intend to do is not to repeat the issues that Tanya and Valentina have already mentioned, but focus on issues that have not been mentioned. Cynthia, am I in a presentation mode?
No, please put it in presentation mode.
Okay, so I'm in it now.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So in Africa, we looked at 3 key issues. Why the need to invest in women and girls. And then in looking at investing in women and girls to push the development, effectiveness, and gender, we also looked at the conflicts that abound in Africa and how that impacts on women's human rights. We also tried to look at the CSW conclusions because CSW focused on financing investment. So we tried to look at the CSW team, the conclusions, and how we can work around that draw out the interlinkages in our work on development and cooperation. And I'll share some of few of the things that we discussed. Around investing in women and girls, some of the things we talked about was issues around women's reproductive health, the high rise of inequalities on the continent. We talked about women's welfare, unpaid care work, and how all that goes to create inequalities for women. And the fact that when we invest in women and girls, it will improve their health. It will bring benefits not only to the woman, but families. It will strengthen our economies because if women have access to resources, if women have access to resources, if they own resources, and if they control resources, it will do a lot of things for them. in terms of education, in terms of employment, for them to have secure livelihoods, in terms of so it's important that women have access to resources, and how investing in women and girls would create sustainable nations. So we were looking at investing in women and girls and how it will help to achieve the sustainable development goals. Issues around shrinking civic spaces for women rights organizations were discussed. Issues around localization and how that our experiences with our development partners on localization, on content creation, how that helps to promote women and girls' rights. Issues around defining what localization means for us in Africa, what localization means for local women rights organizations, what co-creation means for us. Because some of the issues that were raised was that when we talk about co-creation, there are some organizations that come under co-creation, but they have already decided on the interventions that they would want to implement, and they just bring local organizations on board. But if we really need to invest in women and girls, then it is important that local women rights organizations get funding to support the work that they do. We looked at conflict, and then one of the key things that were discussed was the fact that the UNSCR 1325, most countries are not implementing it, and so it was important for us to push our governments to ensure that they implement UNSCR 1335, and also the need to pay issues and conflicts around the world, and the fact that the world is paying more attention to Ukraine-Russia war, to Israeli-Gaza war. They are important, but they are also equally women and girls losing their lives, children losing their lives on the African continent. There are a lot of conflicts on the African continent, and it is important that all these conflicts that abound on the world, special attention is paid to all, because we are all losing. One war is not more important than another war, or one conflict is not more important than another conflict. So we should, the donor community, development partners, everybody, the world should pay attention to all conflicts and not focus on only conflicts among few countries. The issue around underrepresentation of women in peace-building processes, where when it comes to conflict, security, and peace, we realize that there are different interventions trying to support women and all that. But when it comes to peace-building processes, you don't really see the role of women. Women are relegated to the background. So it's important that once they are the ones that bear the brunt of the implications of conflict, when it comes to negotiations, when it comes to peace-building processes, they should be key in the negotiations. For instance, on the African continent, when you look at a country like Rwanda, after their conflict, when they were rebuilding their country, women were part of the building process. That's why now you see more them at having gender parity. So it's important that when we are looking at conflict issues and we are looking at peace building processes, women play a key role in that. We talked about intensification of solidarity among women rights and feminist organizations, and I think that was raised by both Tanya and Valentina in the LAC Central Asia and Europe presentations. And then the issue also about moving from rhetoric, so walking, how did they say, walk the talk, moving from rhetoric to a multi-sectorial approach with a multi-sectorial approach in dealing with sexual violence, which is common in conflict situations. So there are interventions that would support women to be part of some spaces that are having discussions around conflict and peace and all that. But we think that is not enough. Women should be part of peace building initiatives. They should be part of decision making to ensure that they are part and parcel of negotiation processes around peace building. We try to look at the outcomes of CSW 68, some of the issues that were discussed, and how we can build on that to promote quality, transformative financing and accountability for gender equality work. One of the some issues that came up was the need of localization of funds to push gender equality, women's empowerment agenda. And I think I've spoken about that. There is the need for concrete and strategic actions. One of the things that CSW was silent on was on international trade. And even when we take the African continent, you see that many women are involved in cross-border trade. And for us, it's something critical that CSW in its deliberations, in its discussions, should focus on. When we talk about international trade, we shouldn't only focus on big multinational companies and the regulations that guide them, but how even those regulations are how they impact on women, especially those involved in cross-border trade, was important for us. And we also talked about climate finance, the implications of climate change, and then the disproportionate impact on women and girls. However, the conclusions had no clear provisions on climate change and its impact on women and girls. But we also did recognize that there were issues around unpaid care work, reducing and redistribution of unpaid care work, and we thought that was positive. This year, CSW also looked at mental health, menstrual hygiene, and all that, and we felt it is positive. In concluding, some of the things that we talked about were the need to accelerate achievement of gender equality and empowerment for all women and girls. And this should be done through addressing poverty and inequalities, because poverty and inequalities are both on the continent, and also strengthen institutions. Because if you want to accelerate gender equality, if we are talking about transformative financing and accountability for gender equality work, then it's important that institutions are strengthened, and then it's also important to finance gender equality agenda. It's important for us in co-creating, in pushing concepts around localization. Funds go to the ground, funds goes to our local women rights organizations for them to continue to do the work that they are doing. And I think for Africa, these were some of the issues that came up in the regional webinar. I cite issues around shrinking spaces for civic engagement, issues around dwindling funding for gender equality work, and issues around donor community working under co-creation by determining the pace that local women rights organizations should focus, instead of supporting them to implement interventions that they are already engaging to promote sustainability. Issues around conflict that we need to work around, and we need to build solidarity in ensuring that conflict in our country, if we can eradicate it, if we can stop everything at it, is minimized. Thank you all. I'll stop sharing. So these are the conclusions, discussions, outcomes of our regional webinars for Latin America, Europe, Central Asia, and Africa. I believe some of us in this webinar were part of the discussions and would want to add on to some of the things that we did not present. But then I also opened the floor for general discussions on some of the issues that have been raised in these three webinars. So the floor is open. Please either raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand icon or write your interventions in the chat box. And if it's in French or Spanish, then I'll call on our French and Spanish interpreters to read it for us. Are there hands that I'm not seeing? Okay.
There's a hand up.
Please,
I think Indu pant, yeah. So let me allow the person to
Indu, yeah. Indu,
unmute.
please unmute and make your intervention. Indu, are you speaking in English, French, or Spanish?
I think we lost him or her.
Any other? I don't see any hand. Does it mean we are okay with all the issues that were raised and the outcomes that we've shared? Do we have people?
Patricia, sorry. We would like to encourage all our colleagues. You have an excellent experience. You presented your experience during the regional forum. Please present your experience in the large forum. It's very important to know about our best practices, but also challenges, and how we can work together.
Thank you, Valentina. Those of us who were in the webinars, Africa, Central Asia, Europe, and Latin America, please share some of the issues that you discussed in your group.
Specifically in our region, we have.
Olga, can we
Patricia?
hear from you? You said we agree, but we want to hear what you are agreeing on.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, if we don't have any
Patricia,
yes.
I would like to mention that thank you very much for your presentation. It was really very helpful. And I see something. My colleague Olga Bytko from Moldova, yeah, she presented very nice overview regarding Istanbul principle. It's very important in our activity to know and ensure implementation of Istanbul principle. But also it's very important to mention very interesting situation in our region. All countries have a national program on gender equality, have a good legal framework. But one of the challenge exactly is about implementation and also about funding. No money, no direct investment, and the majority activity are implemented by civil society organizations. In this context, it's very important to have maybe a common position at regional and global level. How we can press our governance to be more transparent and to create this accountability mechanism. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you, Valentina, for your thoughts on how we can push our governments to have transparent mechanisms to push for gender equality. I would now call one of the things that we are doing this period. We always talk about development effectiveness and pushing our governments to be effective. But as CSOs, as women rights organizations, as feminist organizations, what are we doing ourselves to evaluate, to assess our own effectiveness? There is the Istanbul principles that help us to evaluate our own effectiveness. The feminist group also, based on the Istanbul principles, have developed a guideline that we use to assess the effectiveness of ourselves. So we about a month and a half ago, we set out to do a survey assessing the development effectiveness of feminist organizations. We shared the survey link across all the regional platforms that we are part of. It was shared widely. Nugu is CPD co-chair, CSO Partnership for Development Effectiveness. Nugu is the co-chair representing the feminist sector. And then she's also the executive director of Forum of Women NGOs in Kyrgyzstan. And Nugu is here to present. She's the one that did the survey for us. So she's here to share the survey findings and some of the recommendations that she has made to help us as women rights organizations, as feminist organizations, to improve on our own effectiveness. So Nugu, I give you the floor and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you so much. I actually sent a message that I cannot share my screen if you allow me to share the screen.
So Cynthia, please, Nugu, I think you've been given access. All the speakers were given access, so you can share your screen.
No, it's not given. Anyway.
Nugu, you can share now.
Okay. Okay. Thank you so much. Do you see now?
Yes. Put it in the presentation mode.
Yeah. Is it better?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Excellent. Dear friends, it's a big pleasure for me to share with you the results of assessing women's organizations' development effectiveness. You know that CPD was very much cooperating with civil society all over the world, and it facilitated the process of assessment of coming up criteria to assess effectiveness, the level of effectiveness of contribution of civil society to sustainable development. So I won't be talking about what does it mean. Civil society recognize we need to be measured from these perspectives, and they are known as Istanbul principles. Valentina just now referred to them. CPD this year conducted a survey among women's rights organizations at the global level. So many of you probably participated in responding to this survey. This survey was developed to start an assessment. We were not assessing previously, so it's a start of assessing and monitoring the civil society development effectiveness among women's organizations. I'm very happy to share with you that this monitoring process reached out to 54 diverse women's organizations worldwide. It is interesting, and actually it's expected that women's rights organizations respect and promote human rights and social justice. The survey confirmed this. 100% of women's rights do so. But let us look at how women's organizations grade their work from this perspective. 55.6% of organizations graded their work as very high, 37 as high, and 7, a little bit more than 7, as good enough. So in fact, it is quite a good picture. Almost 92%, 93% are saying we are doing quite well. Let us share that some details of this survey. About 32% have in place an organizational policy to implement Istanbul Principle on respecting, promoting human rights and social justice. More than half, 59%, have in place a mechanism to integrate this policy in their organizational work. 31.5% of women's rights organizations set up in organization a competence building program. And about 17% have other ways of integrating human rights. In this process of applying principle regarding respecting and promoting human rights and social justice, every women's rights organization faced some challenges. And it's important to mention, and it covers all parameters of measuring our development effectiveness, that there are barriers, external, social, political context. There are internal barriers within our organizations. And of course, there are financing barriers. Number one principle tells about human rights and social justice. Number two, we didn't measure because we are aimed the mission of our organizations on women's rights, empowerment, and gender equality. That's why we go to Istanbul Principle number 3, focus on people's empowerment. 98% focus on people's empowerment, democratic ownership, and participation. How do they do it? First, there are more than majority of women's rights organizations have an agreement in the organization about definition and importance of women's empowerment, democratic ownership, participation. Almost 70% manifest internally in the organizational policies, practices, and daily operations. And about 9% use other means. The next principle, promoting environmental sustainability, we found that it is a challenge for women's rights organizations. We are rating ourselves quite modestly this aspect of our contribution to sustainable development. Only 24% of the responded organizations rating their work as very high. 24 organizations rated as high. First 24 was very high, then the quite high, and 37 rated as moderate. So 1/3 of our organizations still need some more work to do regarding environmental sustainability. 11 rated their work as poor, or as very poor was rated by 3%. So we can see that only around 43% of our organizations have in our organizations a competence building program on this principle. Only 40.7% have organization a policy to implement promotion of environmental sustainability. And slightly more than half, 53.7%, have in place a mechanism to integrate this policy in the organizational work. Definitely the question is, why? So there are some challenges. Actually, there were quite a number of, and we have in the report, we have a detailed review of the challenges, but let's look just in numbers. 72% related limitations in promotion of sustainability to the lack of funding. 46% had limited capacity. And 11%, in other words, every 10th of women's rights organizations do not consider environmental sustainability as a priority. And 12% of women's rights organizations informed that there are other challenges to apply this IP. But despite the challenges in the organization, in the capacity, it is important that women's rights organizations, 70% of organizations, are building strategic alignments and collaboration between CSOs involved in environmental and development initiatives. And this is a good picture that even capacity will lack policies in the organization, we are quite well cooperating and working with those environmental CSOs. The other issue that is important in measuring our organization's development is how do we practice transparency and accountability? And this is what work was actually assessed by our women's organizations as quite well. Majority of women's rights organizations include as core value transparency and accountability. Almost 82% are very well practicing transparency and accountability. About 76% of women's rights organizations have accountability mechanism, and 18% are not practicing transparency accountability. It is important to mention that 57% of women's rights organizations have in the organizations a competence building program on this principle. 37% do not have in the organization such competence building program. 72% have in place organizational policy. 80% do not have such a policy. And about 9 organizations were not clear on this question. The next principle relates to equitable partnership and solidarity. So majority of women's rights organizations, 72%, rate their work in this perspective as very high or high. 18% rated as moderate, and 9% rated their partnership solidarity work as quite poor. 83% organizations build complementary actions by all partners toward shared analysis, programmatic goals, and monitoring, rather than a narrow project contracts. 9% work on narrow project contracts. Related creating and sharing knowledge and committing to mutual learning. We are not bad from this perspective. Almost 65% rate their work as very high or high in this aspect. Almost 30% assess quite moderate. About 6% consider their work related to creating and sharing knowledge as very weak. Majority of organizations practice exchanges between colleagues, peers, volunteers. Women's rights organizations have process on gathering and sharing reliable data, and only 9% of our organizations don't have such process in the organizations. So this was related, how do we create and share knowledge and commit to mutual learning? Now going to our commitment to realizing positive sustainable change. This is also a warning sign. Only 22% of responded women's rights organizations rated this aspect of their work as very high. 42 as high, and about 30% as moderate, and about 6% as very poor. So we can see that we are doing in some aspect quite good, in some aspect we're weak. But the question was also related, how do we promote within other civil society the Istanbul Principle number 2 on women's rights and gender equality? How do women's rights advance gender equality and women's rights among other CSOs? And it should be noted that women's rights organizations play a significant role in advancing women's rights and gender equality agenda in the work of CSOs. For this aim, our organizations cooperate with CSOs in different various forms. And I should say that I didn't list here, but there were quite big list of forms of advancing it among other CSOs. So we have a rich experience in advancing women's rights agenda into civil society organizations' agenda. During the survey, organization listed diverse actions that may help CSOs to apply Istanbul Principle number 2. Let me share with some conclusion and recommendations. Our organizations are very effective in their contribution to sustainable development, as they are the ones who work against discrimination of the half of population all over the world. They work against discrimination against women. They are advancing human rights and social justice. They are empowering marginalized and disadvantaged groups. They are struggling against poverty and disempowerment. They have data, they have expertise, commitment, and experience. But there are challenges that our organizations face to make our work more contributing to sustainable development and to be more effective from development effectiveness perspective. Continuing and sometimes growing patriarchal pressure all over the world set up social, political, cultural barriers for work of women's rights organizations. Value of the women's rights organizations' contribution to the sustainable development at different levels is not recognized in financial and political terms. And as in previous segments it was mentioned, underinvestment is a huge challenge for effective work of the women's rights organizations. For discussion and development of the feminist group recommendations, we, based on the collected responses, bring the attention to warning signs of external CSO enabling environment. And I remember Tanya mentioned it. There is, and Valentina mentioned, big challenges in civic space. Current challenges to advance human rights and social justice. Not only the existing various serious patriarchal norms are the barriers that hinder the work of our organization, but there is a current growing trend of shrinking civic space. So it is important that women's rights organizations indicate it as a challenge, shrinking civic space. In conclusion, we can say that 100% of women's rights organizations respect, promote human rights and social justice. 98% focus on on people's empowerment, democratic ownership. 82% of organizations are very well or well practicing transparency, accountability. 76% have accountability mechanism. So we can proudly say that we are doing quite well. But there are some areas for improvement. Areas for improvement based on the application of the Istanbul Principle monitoring are, first, application of the environmental sustainability, and second, realizing positive sustainable change. Although it is the responsibility of any civil society organizations, women's organizations to integrate, protect, still need to integrate the protection of natural environment into its activities as a cross-cutting issue. This is for us a task because we ourselves rated this our work quite modestly. So only 24% responded from responded organization rated is as high, 37 rated as moderate. And it is important that 11% we are not including it as we are not doing quite well, we are doing quite poor, and it's our self-assessment. Related to the realizing positive sustainable change, the situation is a little bit worse. Only 22% of our organizations rated their work as high, as very high. But I think that we can demonstrate that we can probably reassess our work from this point of view. 30% rate as moderate. But again, it is important to state that 70% are building strategic alignments. There are some recommendations for decision makers, recommendations for governments, donors, and different decision makers. Some of them relate to the social context, political context, financial context. Change patriarchal attitudes towards women's rights and gender equality. Better recognize women's rights as development actors. Opens a substantial space for women's organizations' participation in dialogues, programs. Stop shrinking civic space for women's rights organizations worldwide. Increase investment into women's rights organizations. Address systematic barriers and create pathways for equal access to opportunities for empowerment and democratic ownership. Provide long-term financing for women's rights organizations. Work on compliance processes. Respect women's rights organizations' priorities. Provide regional funding for women's rights initiatives. Provide budget for a competence building program. Organize capacity building for women's rights organizations on integration of the ways of promotion of environmental sustainability. Why? Because majority of the challenges were related to lack of funding. Now, I want to share with you recommendations to ourselves, to women's organizations. As women's organizations, we need to develop our competence in promoting we need to develop our competence in promoting environmental sustainability by developing the capacity of all staff, volunteers, and members. And we need assistance with finance, technical capacity in the application in our daily work to deal with this Istanbul Principle. We need to define what environmental sustainability means for our organization in the context of our organizational work. We need to set up a code of conduct for environmental sustainability. We need to contribute to saving energy, water, papers. We need to incorporate explicitly in our organization strategies, policies, programs, in our practices and activities, promotion and implementation of the work that contribute to environmental and sustainable development. We need to set up mechanism to review periodically and ensure the implementation of the program in line with the promoting environmental sustainability. It is important also for us to set up an accountability process on the application of this principle. Probably it will be good also contributing to data collection on women's environmental needs, environmental changes, and their impacts on women. With this, I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have questions, I will be happy to share any responses that were provided by you.
Thank you, Nogo, for a very comprehensive analysis, sharing the findings and recommendations. Some parts we are doing well, other parts we are not doing well. It's very detailed. I hope we would finalize the report and then we would translate it to French and Spanish and then share with all our colleagues, all women rights organizations, to see how we are doing and how best we can improve on our own effectiveness. Before I open the floor for discussions, there are a few messages in the chat box that I would want to read. The first one talks about, I think it's about the CSW event, and it's coming from our labor colleagues, our labor movement colleagues, the trade unions. The event was an unparalleled opportunity for trade unions to advocate for their priorities for gender equality and workplace democracy, and engage in meaningful dialogues with global leaders and forge networks with women groups. And we have some achievements. It's a bit too long, so I would urge you all to read it. In the chat board, the recognition of statutory or negotiated minimum wages as essential for combating poverty among women, the call for equal work of equal value and for the transition from informal to formal work and universal social policies. It's long, so I will end here. But I want to say that I'm happy that this year's CSW also had a lot of trade union colleagues engaging it. Because when I look at past events, we don't, yes, we have our colleagues from trade unions engaged, but we don't see a lot more of them. And we don't get to see a lot more of labor related issues being discussed. So for me, I was personally happy that this year, a lot of focus was on the trade unions and they are happy about it and a lot of inroads were made. There are some charts in the boards that I believe are either Spanish. I think they are Spanish. So if we can get our Spanish interpreters to read it for us. Yeah. 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 Okay. Thank you, Clara. And I would say that if we are sending the messages, please let's send to everyone so that everyone can have see the messages that we post in the chat box. I will now open the floor. Valentina, I see your hand, but please hold up your fire first. I will want to hear from our colleagues first. So I would open the floor for contributions or sharing of experiences of what Nugu has just presented. The floor is open. Valentina, I'll come to you, but not now. I want to hear from our colleagues. I still don't see hands up. I don't want this conversation to be between among only the speakers. It has to be a general conversation among all of us because we all need to put our efforts together to push the feminist agenda. So I need to see hands and contributions.
Maybe I can put a provoking question.
Right.
Dear participants, dear sisters, dear friends, dear colleagues, because of the time limit, I made it quite technical. But in fact, the data helps us to show and to help negotiations with donors when they sometimes say, you are not transparent. Sometimes we are not transparent, but it is not because we don't want to be transparent, because there are no funding. And your responses in the survey demonstrated there were very particular responses. Why? And I think it's important to show this concern in our negotiation, in our dialogues with donors, so that they were helping to address it. They were not telling you are not doing this. We are able to do. We should do it, but we need this work to be supported. The same with the environmental. How do we learn if there is absolutely no money? How do we make additional reports if there is no staff? But despite these challenges, women's organizations are doing fantastic work. Do you think it will be possible for you to put some received data in your negotiations with donors, or to make visible the data how greatly doing women's organizations?
Please, can we hear from you? We are conducting this webinar in 3 languages. So any language that you want to use is fine by us.
I felt very proud when I was reading responses, not only because we were somewhere 98, 100%, but we were very honest telling that we don't have this policy, for example. And for me, it was such a nice work to read and to see how we can improve ourselves. I think we should share with donors also. What do you think, dear friends, dear participants? Should this data should be shared with donors to negotiate and say, look, you want to improve our work, you need to support us.
We'll share with everybody. So Valentina, let me come to you. Your hand was up.
First of all, I would like to thank to our dear Nurgul for this very important presentation. It's really data that we can use and should use in our work, and thinking together how to work in the future. But also, I would like to continue your idea, Patricia, and of other colleagues. It's very important to connect our feminist agenda, which all international documents.
Hear?
There are some problems with translation. I hope it's okay. I use English. But it's very important to connect our feminist agenda which ILO Convention, which Agenda on Sustainable Development, on CEDAW Convention, on Istanbul Convention, I told about Europe part, and also which Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, because all these documents have references to fundings. And it's very important to explore these issues in the context of international and national commitments of our governments. But we should mention every time these issues. Who should mention? Civil society, our organizations. And all information that were provided by Nurgul are very useful in our work. And what are our next steps?
Right. Thank you, Valentina. I will now open, I know the floor is still open, receiving contributions on the different issues that we've raised. But I also like participants to share their experiences and based on the work that they do, the challenges that they face, and how, and in terms of funding, how they get funding to support the work that they do. So at least I want each continent to give us one person making, sharing their own experiences with us. If I don't see hands, I'll mention names. My Ghanaian colleagues are now saying she's going to mention our names. So please, you raise your hand or I mention your name. I still don't see any hand.
I'd like to encourage colleagues from Moldova. They have an excellent experience on Platform for Gender Equality, Keystone Moldova, and other working on this. Colleagues from Kyrgyzstan have Chinara, of course, Nurgul, and others. I told about my region because it's I know people working very hard and have a very, very good experience.
Yeah,
It's not
Valentina,
easy work.
yeah, Valentina, thank you. We want to hear from our colleagues. So Fatima, Fatumata, kindly share your work, brief experience of your work and the challenges that you face with us. Fatumata. Is Fatumata with us? Can we have Ludmila? I hope I mentioned the name correctly. Ludmila, share your experience with us on the work that you do. Can I call? Is Ludmila?
Fatuma wants to speak, I think.
Okay, Fatima.
Excuse me. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Yeah. Sorry, I don't speak English very well.
Speak French. Speak French and select the French. Click on the globe icon and select French. And please speak French.
Okay. What's the question?
I want you to share your experiences on the work that you do and the challenges that you face. Just a minute. Select the French icon and speak French.
I don't know how to do that.
So go to the icon on I've put mine in English, so I don't know. It's a globe. You will see interpretation. So click on.
I was trying, but it doesn't work. So
Okay, so just speak the English that you would understand.
But the challenge, you're talking about what challenge? About financing or?
Yeah, the work that you do, what are the challenges that you face? Mention your organization and the region and the country.
Okay. So I can speak French or you can understand, you can hear me in French?
Yeah, but if you want to speak in French, you need to select the French button.
So please, she can go ahead and speak in French.
Okay, okay, please speak in French.
Ok. Ok, bonjour tout le monde. Alors, moi, je travaille pour la mission de l'Union africaine pour le Mali et le Sahel et je suis spécialiste sur les questions de genre. Bon, les défis auxquels nous nous sommes confrontés, c'est que le Sahel, quand même, est le théâtre de plusieurs crises et conflits qui a un impact négatif sur la vie des femmes et des filles. Et en même temps, nous assistons au déplacement massif des populations dans les zones, disons, d'une zone à l'autre, ce qui malheureusement impacte négativement la vie des milliers et des millions de femmes et de filles au Sahel. Donc, nous sommes confrontés à un premier défi, c'est comment mettre en place des mécanismes qui nous permettent, par exemple, de savoir quel est le nombre réel, par exemple, de femmes confrontées à ce genre de situation et comment venir en aide dans un contexte d'insécurité, donc on va dire d'insécurité grandissante. Le deuxième défi, c'est le défi du financement des activités qui sont destinées aux femmes, parce que la plupart du temps, on est confronté à des situations où les femmes ne sont pas suffisamment préparées pour mener, par exemple, des activités durables. Et cela pose énormément de problèmes. Can't hear the English translation.
Yeah, we can't hear the English translation, so I really wish you could switch on
I'm sorry. Okay, I will talk later. I'll talk later.
Okay. Because you have to switch. There is an icon, interpretation. It's a globe icon.
Yes, I say yes, but I click on yes.
No, you don't have to say yes. You have to click on it, and then when you click on it, you click on French.
That's what I did.
Okay, can we hear from Deborah from Ghana?
Patricia, please go and come back. Can you hear me?
Yeah, because we were not hearing anything. That's why she decided to stop, because she was speaking in French and we were not hearing the English version. But we did not hear it. Yeah. We did not hear it. We did not hear it. Anyway, it's fine. Daria, can we hear from you? Frank? Yeah. There is someone on the floor. We can't hear the interpretation.
I think we need to have more patience and understanding. There
Franca,
are many
Franca,
situations.
can we hear from you from Ghana?
Yes. All right. So quick one. One of our challenges that we face aside financing is compliance when it comes to some of the documents that we need to work with, especially as a young women's rights organization. We sometimes don't have all the compliance documents that they request for. And so I think in the recommendation from the survey, I saw that donor or grants organizations need to help the women's rights organizations with compliance. And that is one of the challenges that we face. Of course, we have the financial aspects where it becomes difficult for grassroots women's rights organizations like us to get funds. And so we have to use alternative fundings for the work that we do. Thank you.
Thank you, Franca. I see Mariama. I don't know if Mariama is still on the call.
She's not.
Okay. So Mariama is where it works with it Canada, Global Affairs Canada. So I would have loved to hear from her. If we don't have any hands up, the speakers, if you have in a second, please, a second, if you have final words, kindly share it and let's take a group picture and end the call. Our speakers, so I'll start with Shanta. Just a second.
Yes, I think for transformative financing under our Istanbul principle for women's women right organization, we really need to get awareness about the link between Istanbul principle and the current trend and the current crisis that we all are facing. So that awareness and activism need to be generated further to really achieve gender equality and women's empowerment, all diversities in all countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Shanta. So, Nugu, your final words.
Dear friends, I hope you can put in chat if you do agree, if you feel that the survey was revealing a true picture, you can just put in chat. Is the picture that the survey gave to us, is it true or not? And I hope very much that we can continue in future hearing how great women's organizations greatly contributing to the sustainable development, that women's organizations are one of the most effective in contribution to sustainable development, despite challenges. And we should address also shrinking space. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nugu. Valentina, your final words.
As I understand, we have a lot of work, but only together and common effort we can do it. And it's very important, not only our solidarity in general, it's very important to have a common vision, common position, common support, and other. And learning every day. It's very our empowering. It's also, we need to learn more. We need to realize together different actions and have a common platform, sharing our experience and our commitments and learning how we can push our governance to be more transparent and more accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. And thank you to all for joining this webinar. I think we've had a lot of discussions, and in the discussions, there were a lot of conclusions, so I'm not going to repeat them. Thank you all for joining us. It's been a great webinar because a lot of insights have been shared. We are grateful to our speakers, Tanya, who had to leave for another meeting, Valentina, Nugu, Shanta, and Cynthia that pull all this together for us. Cynthia, we are so grateful. And our wonderful interpreters, Daniela, Josephine, Peter, and Senor, for taking us this 2-hour journey. We started 30 minutes earlier, so 2.5-hour journey. Thank you all, and for all the participants. We organized this webinar within a short time. The notice was very short. Yesterday, we were even thinking of rescheduling it, but you made it and you joined us. We are so grateful. Thank you all. Please, can we put on our cameras and take a picture?
And thanks to all. Thank you.
And thanks to our dearest Patricia.
Thank you.
Our
Thank you.
great global coordinator.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
So
But Patricia, at the end, if it's possible, I would like to mention during our regional workshop, many people asked that Nurgul was the first people who put the question regarding financial issues. And she was the first teacher in these issues. Thank you,
Great.
Nurgul.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
all.
you.
Cynthia, please, are we taking the picture?
Yes, we have.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. We are most grateful.
Thank you.
Merci. Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you.
Merci, gracias, thank you, спасибо.
Right.
Yeah.
Namaste.
Namaste.
Да, merci molt.
Merci.
Should we stay for a couple of minutes, the FG?
Okay. So
Yeah.
then we need to get when everybody leaves. Yeah.
Cynthia can.
Cynthia, can we? You're welcome. I think our interpreters can leave us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Daniela.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Daniela. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Josefina. Thank you,
Long
Daniela.
time. Thank you,
Yeah.
Peter.
Oh, Josefina.
And thank you, Senor.
Was it Josefina there?
Thank you. Merci.
We want
Merci.
to see your face. No, participants have left, so it's just the organizers. That's why we said we want to see your face. It's just the organizers that are here.
Josefina, it's so nice to see
But
you.
it's fine. And we will want to have a short meeting, so our interpreters can leave now.
Cynthia can manage it. She can stop for everyone.
We have few people that still have to leave.
Yeah. Женя, можно отключаться сейчас
We
уже.
still have the attendees, 4 of them still on.
Yeah.
Al-Hassan, please, you can leave. Saloni.
Did you stop the recording? You can stop the recording.
Yeah, Cynthia, stop recording. Yeah. Al-Hassan, you can leave.
Женя,